But Turkey for the Turks meant something else. Turkey for the Turks, as we see from what happens, means Turkey for the Islamic ethnic group called Turks. No one else is included. Someone wants some questions about Jews later on, but generally speaking, Christians were not going to be included in that Turkey for the Turks, and that's why the Metropolitan had to be killed. Now, even before the troops arrived in Smyrna, the European communities had withdrawn their people. French, British, etc., had all been evacuated on their ships just in case something goes wrong. The Greek military had been evacuated by the Greek Navy, and the Greek government had been evacuated by the Greek Navy. So who was left with the citizens of Smyrna? From the time the Turks arrived, for about 10 days, no ship in the harbor would take a Greek or Armenian or any other refugee on board. And there are many stories of people who swam out to the ships and tried to climb out to an American ship or a British ship and were slapped down. People went out in boats and they just wouldn't take them because they were under orders from their governments not to take on any refugees. Now, there's only one exception, and I have to talk about it. Oh, and the Greek Navy, you say, well, what about the Greek Navy? The Greek Navy was in Mytilene and at sea, and they were waiting for orders from the Greek government. And the Greek government was totally in disarray and didn't know what to say. So you had all these people on the docks of Smyrna, the whole population of Smyrna, and nobody willing to take them out. And the Turks had now said, you got to be out of here by the end of the month. One exception, and as I say, I got to talk about this one exception because it's very personal, was the Japanese cargo ship. Recently, there's a book came out called The Ships of Mercy, which is not a bad book, and he says this ship did not exist. No, it did exist. I know it existed because my mother, who was then 12 years old, and my uncle, who was then 10 years old, were saved on that ship. And their stories kind of, it's atypical because of the Japanese ship, but otherwise it's quite typical. My grandfather had already gone to North America. My grandmother had died, so my mother and uncle were living in the village, and they were being taken care of by their relatives, and my grandfather was sending money to them. When the Turks began to advance on the city, somehow the children got separated from the relatives. Whether they were abandoned, whether they just got caught in the panic, I'm not sure. They're not sure. They weren't sure. But they had to walk themselves. This 12-year-old, 10-year-old walked all the way to Smyrna, arrived at Smyrna, and by sheer luck were picked up by a human rights organization. And the human rights organization said, well, these are young, little kids, let's put them on that boat, and they took it out to the harbor where the Japanese officer was. Now, the Japanese ship was not a warship. It was a cargo ship. And according to all accounts, he dumped his cargo to take on human beings. And he saved, I forget the exact number, I have it written down there, I should put it in the speech. But he saved quite a few people. And he took them to Praeus, and they were landed there, and they ended up in a camp in Volos, and my mother eventually made her way to North America. But this captain was the only one that did it. I think there was one other Italian boat where they said that somebody bribed them with 5,000, I don't know if it's drachmas or pounds, and he took on some people. But the other ships didn't take any people on. On September 19th, Asa Jennings, who was a staff member of the Young Man's Christian Association, the YMCA, miraculously arrived with a fleet of ships, a fleet of Greek ships. Now, it was an extraordinary effort on his part. He went to great efforts to get this done. He saw what was going on in Smyrna. He saw the Greek government wasn't doing anything. And it's a long story of how he got the Greek government to agree. They made him an admiral and he brought the ships. So read a book called Ships of Mercy, and it'll tell you the whole story of how he pulled this off. But he did arrive on the 19th, and they were able to start evacuating people. As an American, I'm happy to say that the American Navy protected the Greek ships. A lot of the Greek ships had either American flags on them, or they had an American battleship, not battleship, but a fighting ship next to them to protect them. So the Greek ships would take out, in the next month, 200,000 people off the docks of Smyrna, mainly under American protection. Another probably 40,000 were taken off by American ships and British ships, which were now taking part. And there were a few other ships finally took a few people. Now, how accurate are these numbers? Well, it's over 200,000, and it's probably not more than 250,000. That's an awful lot of people. This is the greatest naval evacuation of civilians in world history. I don't know of any other country. Here, this poor battle little Greece got these people out. It's an amazing story. We even had the stories of, during the evacuation, Greek fishermen from the nearby islands would come with their little boats and take on 15, 20 people, whatever they could. So like the British at Dunkirk, where all those ships went. So it was quite extraordinary and marvelous event. But it had a dark side. All accounts of evacuations tell you that the people being evacuated were women, children, and the elderly. The absence of men was not by choice, but due to the decree of the Turkish government. The Turkish government said no male of fighting age could be evacuated. Now, there weren't any birth certificates being checked at this point. So if you were robust, you could be a 15-year-old. You could be a 14-year-old. If you were big and husky, you were a fighting age. You could be in your 50s. And if you were a fighting age, you didn't get on the boats. So basically, practically all able-bodied men were refused to get on the boats. Now, how did they do this? They had 5 gates. You had to pass through these 5 gates to get to the ships that are going to evacuate you. And at each gate, you had a pass inspection from the Turkish soldiers. And basically, they took anything you had. If you didn't lose everything on the first gate, you lost it at the second gate. If you didn't get it at the second gate, you got it at the third gate. And by the time you got to the 5th gate, you didn't have anything left. Some Greek men, dressed as women, tried to pass through. Didn't make it. Some Greek men, not understanding the situation, tried to bribe their way through. So they put a bribe, and the guy said, "Oh, you got money? What else you got?" They took the money and kicked them out of the line. Some of the Greek men jumped into the water, tried to swim to the ships. And it was so difficult. Sometimes they were shot, sometimes they just drowned, because I'm sure they didn't think about taking their shoes off and so forth. The accounts say that their bodies were so thick that they just they just filled the bay with dead bodies. And that young Turkish kids would jump into the bay and search the bodies to see if they had gold teeth or bracelets or what have you. So very few men were able to escape. How many? Again, a hard number to come by. Certainly in the tens of thousands, maybe as many as 50,000 men. Were they all Greeks? No, they were not all Greeks. Many were Armenians. Somebody asked me earlier, were there Assyrians? I haven't seen anything about Assyrians, but maybe there weren't very many Assyrians in that particular location. Now, let's be clear. These actions are not done by irregulars. They're not done in the heat of battle. They're not the fog of war. They're by order of the Turkish government. The commander-in-chief of the government is Ataturk. He's sitting in the suburbs. The general is sitting right off the docks. So there's no, we couldn't control things. They were totally in control.